Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. If we go into the supermarket, we can see that they've started selling nuts, and people consume nuts at Christmas. It's a tradition, and they're a very good source of nutrients. It's a shame that people don't consume them more frequently all year round, but there is obviously problems with availability. They tend only to be available in the mainstream around Christmas time. But nuts are very important in human nutrition. They have some unique nutritional properties, and in particular walnuts are a food that should really be incorporated into people's diets regularly, because they have some very interesting nutritional properties, and they have some very interesting health effects. So what are the health effects of walnuts? Well, if we look at the doctrine of signatures, which is a Greek philosophical idea that plant foods resemble the parts of the body they are supposed to treat, we see that walnuts look like the human brain. Take a walnut, you take the shell off it, you place the walnut on a table. It does look a lot like the cerebral hemispheres of the human brain. And that's interesting because walnuts are a very good source of alpha-linolenic acid, and alpha-linolenic acid is an essential fatty acid, and in humans it is metabolized to longer chain fatty acids, particularly icosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, and these longer chain fatty acids are incorporated into neurons in the brain, and research shows that they are essential really for brain development and brain function in humans. They're not only structural components of neurons, they're also required for the formation of short-lived hormones, which are very likely required for neuronal function. So the doctrine of signatures suggests that the walnut is good as a good food for brain function, and that appears to be backed up by sound scientific evidence. Now, alpha-linolenic acid is obviously an essential fatty acid, and it has more of a role in humans than just helping brain function. It's also a cardioprotective nutrient, and in the same way that it's converted into icosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid incorporated into neurons in the brain, it's also incorporated into all cells in the body, and this accumulation of these two long chain fatty acids, including alpha-linolenic acid in cells of the body, allows cells to produce eicosanoids, which are short-lived hormones that regulate cell function. And alpha-linolenic acid in this role is required in particular to regulate the inflammatory reaction in cells, and it also regulates platelet function and blood clotting. Now that's important because these three factors have implications for cardiovascular disease. Now, when we look at inflammation, we see that cardiovascular disease is increasingly being thought of as a disease of inflammation. And this may relate to consumption of the Western diet. Cardiovascular disease is associated with consumption of the Western diet. It's a Western lifestyle disease. The Western diet induces inflammation, and this inflammation is likely the cause of cardiovascular disease. Now, how does alpha-linolenic acid protect from cardiovascular disease and this inflammation that may be the cause? Well, the Western diet is very high in another essential fatty acid called linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic acid are the two essential fatty acids, and they're required in a ratio. There's a particular ratio that humans require in their diet that is about 3 grams of linoleic acid for about every gram of alpha-linolenic acid. And when the fatty acids are in those ratios, the cells regulate themselves to health. That ratio is required for the correct function of cells. If that ratio is deviated from, then you get problems with the cells. They start to cause, they start to become inflamed. There starts to be an increase in platelet aggregation of platelets, blood clotting changes, and all forms of cellular function start to become altered detrimentally. Now, the Western diet supplies too much linoleic acid and too little alpha-linolenic acid. The ratio should be around 3 to 1, and what we find in the Western diet is the ratio may be 10 to 1, it may even be 20 to 1 in some individuals. And this causes a pro-inflammatory effect, and this effect is chronic. It lasts for decades, and this inflammation is likely the cause of many Western lifestyle diseases. Now, what can you do if you're eating a Western lifestyle, diet? Well, if you take a Western diet and you supplement it with a source of omega-3 fatty acids, such as the walnut, what you tend to do is you tend to correct that imbalance in the essential fatty acids. You can bring the ratio back down to the 3 to 1 that is required, and this reduces inflammation, and this reduces the risk of many Western lifestyle diseases, particularly cardiovascular disease. There are other diseases that are linked to imbalances in eicosanoids, but cardiovascular disease is perhaps the most studied in this respect. So walnuts have an important function because they're one of the only sources of this alpha-linolenic acid in the diet. Flax seeds also contain high amounts of alpha-linolenic acid, but really there aren't many sources. And alpha-linolenic acid tends to be removed from processed foods because it spoils very easily, and also the Western diet contains a lot of vegetable oils, and most vegetable oils tend to be better sources of linoleic acid than they are of alpha-linolenic acid. So all of this comes together to create the perfect storm of a pro-inflammatory state for those that eat the Western diet. So walnuts have an important part to play because they supply alpha-linolenic acid, and this alpha-linolenic acid certainly has a cardioprotective effect. Now remember, if you eat a traditional diet, you're probably eating a lot of green leafy vegetables, you're probably eating a certain amount of nuts, and you probably also eat a certain amount of fish, and fish also contains omega-3 fatty acids. So traditional diets, particularly diets like the Mediterranean diet, they do tend to have the correct ratios of linoleic to alpha-linolenic acid, and that is why they are anti-inflammatory diets. So really, we should be looking to diets like the Mediterranean diet and looking at the ratios that they have for these fatty acids and trying to emulate that in our own food in order to be able to reduce inflammation and reduce Western lifestyle diseases. Now, that's not the only reason that walnuts are cardioprotective. They have this alpha-linolenic acid, which has been shown to be a cardioprotective nutrient. However, they're also a very good source of arginine. Now, arginine is an amino acid. Under certain circumstances, it can become an essential amino acid, and there is evidence that some people are perhaps deficient in arginine. Now, arginine is useful as a cardioprotective nutrient because it is a molecule that is required. It's an amino acid that is required for the production of a short-lived signal molecule called nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is released from blood vessels, and evidence shows that nitric oxide is required for the correct dilation of blood vessels. Now, when blood vessels dilate, the peripheral resistance in the cardiovascular system decreases, and that increases blood flow and decreases blood pressure. So nitric oxide is required for the correct formation of for the correct homeostatic control of blood pressure. If there is a deficiency of nitric oxide production, then what happens is that blood pressure can rise. Now, if you take arginine and you give it to people with normal blood pressure, it has no effect at all. But clinical studies on humans and animal experiments have shown that administration of arginine to people and animals with high blood pressure causes a reduction in that blood pressure. Now, the reason for this is that arginine reacts with an oxygen molecule. It forms another amino acid called citrulline, and also nitric oxide, and this nitric oxide can then be released from the blood vessels, which reduces their blood pressure. So it's not entirely clear why supplemental arginine does help, because most Western lifestyle diets would have enough arginine in the protein that they contain. There is obviously some biochemical reason within the body that's not fully understood, but supplemental arginine has been shown to lower blood pressure. So that is another reason that walnuts may be cardioprotective. It's something that hasn't been extensively researched, but it's interesting to note that there is more than one reason why walnuts may be cardioprotective. But there is a third reason. Now, Walnuts are a good source of antioxidants. They contain particularly a chemical called ellagic acid. Now, ellagic acid is an antioxidant. It's bioavailable in humans. It's known to have antioxidant effects. Now, antioxidants have cardioprotective effects in humans because, and it's again relating to the nitric oxide production, they decrease oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is able to inhibit an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide synthase is the enzyme that's required for the synthesis of nitric oxide, and what we tend to find is that those people that have systemic oxidative stress, in other words they have a lot of free radicals in their body, they have a deficiency of antioxidants, these people tend to have low levels of nitric oxide synthase activity, and this reduces the amount of nitric oxide that they can produce, and this causes something called endothelial dysfunction, whereby the blood vessels are not able to relax in response to blood flow correctly, and this causes an increase in blood pressure as well. Now, it's not just walnuts, not just ellagic acid that have been shown to be beneficial at increasing nitric oxide production in blood vessels. Many antioxidants, many different diets have been tested, including the Mediterranean diet, and any diet, any food high in antioxidants will increase the production of nitric oxide in blood vessels, and this will allow them to dilate correctly in response to blood flow, and this will cause your blood pressure to normalise. So there's a number of reasons why walnuts are cardioprotective. The main reason is likely because they contain alpha-linolenic acid, but they also are a good source of antioxidants, and they also contain arginine, which may be required for nitric oxide synthesis. So I would suggest that you go and buy your walnuts at Christmas and you enjoy them. They're very tasty. Most people enjoy cracking open their nuts and having a good feed at Christmas. But I would suggest that you look for a source of nuts and try and eat walnuts particularly all year round. Something that puts people off eating nuts is the fact that they contain a lot of fat. Now, most people believe that if they eat too much fat, they will get fat. Firstly, the fats that are in walnuts are not really the sorts of fats that are stored preferentially as body fat. They contain a lot of monounsaturated fat, they contain polyunsaturated fat, and they contain essential fatty acids, this alpha-linolenic acid. These fats are really, they're not the sort of fats that are associated with weight gain, they're not the sort of fats that are associated with ill health. But secondly, studies have looked at the absorption of fats from nuts, and the absorption of fats is not actually as great as people think. You don't absorb all of the fat that's in the nuts, and that's because the fat is contained within the cell wall. It's a parenchymal cell wall. It's very tough. It's not digestible by human enzymes, and studies have measured the absorption of fat, and based on a number of very good studies, a lot of the fat is not actually absorbed from nuts. A lot of the energy simply passes straight through and is excreted. So what you see on the packet that tells you how much fat and how much energy there are within nuts is not actually a representation of what you will absorb. And obviously you won't absorb all of the alpha-linolenic acid from nuts, or all of the minerals, or all of the nutrients, because some of them will be encapsulated in cells. Those cells, if they're not broken open during the chewing process, most of them will simply pass straight through. So don't think that if you eat lots of nuts you're going to get fat. I have done a video on why nuts won't make you fat. I would suggest you check that out if you want some more details about why nuts are actually a very good weight loss food. Those people that eat more nuts tend to have lower body weights, and clinical studies that have fed people nuts show that they do lose weight. So don't be afraid of eating nuts because they contain fat and high amounts of energy. They're very cardioprotective. Most nuts are actually good for the cardiovascular system, as well as containing these beneficial fats. As well as containing arginine, they also contain a lot of minerals. For example, Brazil nuts contain selenium in very high concentrations, and selenium may be cardioprotective as well. So eating a range of nuts, not just walnuts all year round, should provide you with good cardioprotection. So the take-home message from this is, don't be afraid of nuts because they contain a lot of fat. It's Christmas, so enjoy eating your nuts, but try and find a source of nuts and eat them all year round. They are a very high quality food, and they will provide you with very good health benefits.